Rain slashed against the pavement outside the busy outdoor shopping mall in Houston. The sky a slate of grey as hurried shoppers darted under awnings and umbrellas. At the main entrance, a woman in a wheelchair sat motionless, soaked to the bone, her thin jacket clinging to her frame. Her gloved hands trembled slightly as she tried to pull open the heavy glass door, wheels of her chair slipping slightly on the slick concrete. People passed her, some dodging puddles, others glued to their phones, none stopping. Just 10 feet away, inside a sleek cafe with steamed-up windows, 2 teen employees leaned near the counter, sipping sodas and watching. Riley, barely 17, smirked and muttered under her breath, loud enough for Ben to hear, "If you can shop, you can push a door." Ben chuckled, not bothering to lower his voice. "These people always act helpless." Riley laughed behind her hand. The woman heard them, her head tilted just slightly in their direction, eyes flicking up for a brief moment. Her clothes were modest and practical, a raincoat with a frayed hem, dark slacks, waterlogged shoes. Her hair, damp and pulled back in a low twist, clung to her cheeks. She made no sound, but something in her eyes, wounded, exhausted, knowing, lingered. Then, without a word, a janitor in a green polo and soaked sneakers jogged up. "Luis," he pushed the door open and held it wide, not making a show of it, just doing what needed to be done. She nodded once, solemnly, and wheeled herself inside, water dripping from her sleeves, her fingers still clutching the wheel rims tightly. Behind her, Riley rolled her eyes. "Whatever," she muttered, turning back to her phone. The woman's wheels squeaked against the polished floor as she moved past storefronts and kiosks, heading toward a small hallway marked security office. The camera lingered on her hands, red raw, trembling, and the disgusted expression still stamped across Riley's face. Then a voiceover, soft but steady, cut in. But that woman they ignored wasn't just any customer. Elaine Carter had once graced the covers of business magazines, a vision of elegance and command in tailored suits and patent heels, the driving force behind Carter Plaza and its parent brand. At 47, she had built an empire alongside her late husband, Richard, a man of vision, loyalty, and boundless belief in her. Together, they turned vacant acreage into a thriving retail haven in the heart of Houston. But 6 years ago, everything changed. A drunk driver ran a red light, and the world Elaine knew shattered in an instant. The crash claimed Richard's life and left Elaine with a broken spine, her legs paralyzed below the waist. Recovery was slow and cruel. Physically, she mended as best she could. Emotionally, she disappeared. The woman who had once commanded boardrooms became a silent signature on emails, managing her holdings from behind closed doors, away from flashing bulbs and the pitying looks she loathed. She hadn't stepped foot inside her own mall in nearly 5 years, but lately whispers had reached her. Complaints from customers brushed off, accusations of discriminatory behavior toward disabled patrons, non-white customers, teenagers, even seniors. Vendors noticed a shift in tone from once courteous staff, and somewhere, buried in the unease, Elaine felt it. Her vision had been diluted. Her name was still emblazoned on every sign, but the soul of her creation was slipping. So one overcast Thursday morning, she made a decision. She asked her assistant, Tamara, to clear her schedule and bring the van around. Tomorrow, loyal, sharp-eyed, and fiercely protective, hesitated. "They won't recognize you, Elaine, and if they do, they'll pretend." Elaine looked up from her lap, voice steady. "That's exactly the point." Without designer labels or sleek updos, Elaine dressed plainly grey jacket, slacks, and soft-soled shoes. Her chair, lightweight and well-used, was a far cry from the confident stride she used to command the plaza floor with. Yet as she rolled into Carter Plaza that day, unannounced and unaccompanied, no one spared her a second glance. She watched. The passers-by, the way eyes slid past her like she was furniture. She felt the bite of indifference in every sidestep, an exhaled sigh. The janitor named Louis, who held the door for her, was one of the few exceptions, and Elaine noted his name carefully. But Riley's comment from the cafe lingered. These people always act helpless. It rang louder than the rain. Elaine moved slowly through the familiar halls, now foreign in atmosphere. She saw accessibility buttons that didn't work, store clerks who ignored her presence, a security guard who looked annoyed when she asked for directions. Everything she experienced, she documented in tidy, measured notes on her phone. Her fingers moved with purpose, even if her legs did not. This was no emotional outburst. It was a methodical investigation. She wasn't just gathering information. She was gathering evidence. The plaza bore her name, her husband's legacy, her life's work, and yet here, today, she was nobody, just a disabled woman trying to shop, and no one except Louis saw her as anything more. Behind her composed face, something inside her burned, not from the rudeness alone, but from the heartbreak of realizing what her silence had allowed. This wasn't the place she and Richard had dreamed of. It had changed, or maybe it had revealed itself. Either way, Elaine wasn't going to let it continue. Not now. Not ever again. The scent of new fabric and floral air freshener greeted Elaine as she wheeled herself into Liza and Monroe, one of the signature clothing stores housed within Carter Plaza. She moved slowly through the store's polished aisles, her eyes scanning racks of blazers and winter coats. The store was half empty, quiet except for the low thrum of music and the sound of her wheels gliding across the tile. Her gaze settled on a soft grey jacket, classic cut, perched on a rack just out of reach. She waited a moment, then approached. The front counter, where Riley, the same teenage cashier from earlier, was leaning over her phone, tapping lazily. "Excuse me," Elaine said softly, gesturing toward the coat. "Would you mind helping me reach that jacket?" Riley barely looked up. Her eyes flicked over Elaine, first the chair, then the rain-damp clothes, then away. "We're not allowed to assist with merchandise unless you're making a purchase," she said flatly, her tone clipped and disinterested. From behind the counter, Ben let out a short, smug laugh. "Policy," he added under his breath. Elaine's fingers curled around the armrests of her chair. The humiliation didn't come from needing help. It came from the casual cruelty, the laziness of judgment, the dismissal without thought. Before she could reply, the door chimed, and a woman walked in, young, confident, stylish. Riley's demeanor changed instantly. She straightened, put on a syrupy smile, and called out, "Welcome. Can I help you find anything today?" Elaine watched in silence as the woman was ushered toward a display with compliments and cheerful chatter. No one noticed Elaine leave. Her face remained unreadable as she wheeled herself back into the mall's corridor, the overhead lights casting long, gleaming reflections on the floor beneath her. Her eyes stayed dry, but something had calcified inside her. It wasn't just disappointment, it was resolve. That night, back in her home office, Elaine sat across from a stunned corporate, bored on a late-night video call. Tamara sat just behind her, arms crossed, watching closely. Elaine's voice was calm but carried the weight of finality. Effective immediately, she began, "I want full employee audits, anonymous secret shoppers in every store, HR reviews, with written evaluations. Start with the East Wing." The board was silent, blinking, as if unsure what had triggered this sudden wave. She didn't give them time to ask. "We've tolerated too much under the illusion of smooth operations," she continued. "We've failed the values this company was built on. That ends tonight." Someone on the board tried to speak, but Elaine raised a hand. "And clear my calendar," she said firmly. "I'll be returning in person, wheelchair and all." Tamara's lips twitched into the faintest smile. It wasn't just a declaration, it was a warning. Elaine wasn't coming back as a name on a plaque or a title in an email. She was returning as the woman who built Carter Plaza from dirt and scaffolding. And this time, she would be seen. The buzz started subtly, at first a ripple of tension that spread through Carter Plaza like a low electrical current. Whispers among employees echoed in back rooms and group chats. Someone from corporate was watching. Someone was evaluating, auditing, asking questions. No one knew who exactly, but the presence was felt. Store managers urged staff to be extra professional, but the warnings faded with time, especially when the mysterious visitor never seemed to show up in a suit or clipboard. She was just a woman in a wheelchair, usually alone, always quiet, unremarkable in appearance to those who never looked closer. But it was Elaine, and she was everywhere. Over several days, Elaine returned in various outfits, sometimes in casual jeans and scarves, other times in long cardigans or elegant coats. Her presence was consistent, but the responses she received were not. In one boutique, a store manager crouched down to speak to her slowly, like addressing a confused child. "Do you need someone to call your caregiver, sweetie?" the woman asked, her voice sticky with condescension. Elaine offered a thin, polite smile, saying nothing as she left. In another instance, a uniformed security guard trailed behind her for 15 minutes, clearly suspicious, radioing someone with his eyes locked on her back. When she finally stopped and asked if there was a problem, he stuttered and walked away. The worst was the restroom. She wheeled herself up to the counter, unable to reach the high soap dispenser. The attendant didn't even turn around when she asked for help, just continued scrolling on her phone as if the request hadn't existed. Each encounter cut deeper, not because Elaine needed validation, but because they mirrored something far more dangerous: systemic rot. This wasn't about one rude cashier or a lazy attendant. This was about an ecosystem that had grown indifferent to dignity. As she navigated these painful experiences, her mind often flashed back 2 years earlier, before the accident, when she swept through these halls in stilettos and silk. Back then, she was greeted with deference, her name whispered with awe. Managers knew to offer her lattes without asking. Security opened doors with a smile. Customers paused when she passed. She had been someone then. Now, the only person who saw her clearly was the one least expected: Luis, the janitor. He was always nearby, never intrusive. He offered doors, moved chairs, fetched dropped keys, all with quiet grace and zero pity. Elaine noticed him watching her once with a thoughtful expression, like a man working through a puzzle. She didn't realize he'd solved it until one afternoon. As she rolled past the fountain on the lower level, he passed her discreetly, pressing a folded paper into her hand. She opened it later in her car. The handwriting was scratchy but firm. "I know who you are. If no one else sees you, I do." The note hit her harder than expected. She didn't cry in the mall. She never would. But alone in the back seat of her SUV, engine off, the rain drumming softly on the roof, Elaine broke down. Not just for herself, for all the invisible people who moved through places like this, judged and discarded. People like her. People who didn't wear power like armor anymore. When Tamara found her sitting in the car, her hands trembling slightly, she knelt by the door and said, "You don't need to prove anything. You already built this place." Elaine looked at her with quiet fire. "They're not just failing me," she said, voice low and hard. "They're failing every woman, every elder, every person they think doesn't matter." The final blow came 2 days later. Elaine had just left the coffee shop, unrecognized yet again, when she wheeled past the employee corridor and caught Ben and Riley standing near the vending machines, laughing loudly. They hadn't noticed her. "I swear, if that woman's got money," Riley snorted. "Then I'm Beyoncé," Ben chortled in agreement. "Seriously, it's always the broke ones demanding the most attention." Elaine paused just a few feet. away, unseen, unheard. And then she smiled a calm, knowing smile that didn't reach her eyes. She turned back to Tamara that afternoon and simply said, "Then let's give her a stage." The Carter Plaza atrium had never been so full. Employees gathered under the illusion of celebration, milling around the decorated space beneath strings of lights and a banner that read, "Employee Appreciation Day." There was music, catered snacks, and a vague promise of bonuses. Attendance was mandatory. Most assumed it was just a morale stunt from corporate after all the recent whispers, but something felt different. There was a tension, an electricity, as if the walls themselves knew. Something was about to shift. At exactly noon, Tamara stepped onto the modest stage at the front of the atrium, holding a microphone with a calm, firm expression. She waited for the murmuring to die down before saying, "Thank you all for being here. Today we honor not only our staff but our foundation. Please welcome our founder and owner, Mrs. Elaine Carter." The silence that followed was thick and immediate. Heads turned. A few gasps echoed through the crowd. Ben, standing near the back, blinked as if trying to process what he'd heard. Riley, gripping a paper plate of fruit, went pale and dropped her fork, and then, slowly and with dignified grace, Elaine Carter rolled forward from behind the curtain. No makeup tricks, no disguises, just Elaine poised, composed, and unmistakably powerful. The woman they had ignored, the woman they had mocked. And now, the woman with the microphone. She paused at center stage, eyes sweeping across the sea of stunned faces. "You saw a woman in a chair," she began, her voice steady but sharp. "You saw weakness, you saw inconvenience, but you never saw me." The air stilled. No music, no shuffling, no coughs, just the quiet collapse of assumptions. Elaine continued, recounting without venom but with precision the incidents she'd witnessed. No names, no finger-pointing, just cold, undeniable facts. "You didn't know who I was," she said. "But that's not the point. The point is, treated me how you'd treat anyone you thought had no power." She reached into her lap and pulled out a note, pad pages worn and marked. "I took notes, not for revenge, for accountability." She listed behaviors, dates, times, patterns. Her voice never raised, but each word landed like a stone in water, sending ripples through the crowd. People avoided eye contact. Some shifted uncomfortably. A few looked toward the exit. But there was no place to hide from the reflection she was holding up. "Today," Elaine declared, "this plaza begins a new chapter, not with shame, but with accountability." She turned to Tamara, who nodded and handed her a final list. Elaine looked down, then up again. "Effective immediately. Employees Ben Harmon and Riley Joyce are under formal HR review and are suspended pending further investigation." A gasp broke out. Riley's mouth parted as if to protest, but no words came. Ben looked like he'd aged a decade in 2 seconds. Elaine didn't pause. "Luis Torres, whose quiet kindness reminded me what integrity looks like, is promoted to customer relations supervisor. Accessibility and empathy training for all staff will begin next week." She'll let the silence stretch. And then she spoke her final line, voice firm and full. "Kindness is not a policy, it's a mirror. And today you saw your reflection." Elaine held that moment, not to gloat, but to let it settle. She wasn't there to destroy, she was there to rebuild. And as she turned her chair and exited the stage, applause didn't erupt. Not yet. There was only the weight of truth, and a plaza full of people finally seeing Dot. In the days following the atrium announcement, a quiet reckoning swept through Carter Plaza. Employees walked with new awareness, as if the very air had shifted. Riley, face drawn and eyes rimmed with regret, approached Elaine one morning near the fountain court. She hesitated before speaking. hands clenched at her sides. "Mrs. Carter, I just wanted to say I'm sorry for how I treated you." "I didn't know." Elaine stopped her gently with a raised hand, her expression composed but resolute. "Apologies," she said evenly, "mean little without changed behavior." Riley nodded, swallowing the sting, and stepped back without pressing further. Ben didn't wait for the full weight of consequence. He resigned before the HR review concluded, leaving behind only a terse email and a cleared locker. In his absence, the plaza didn't collapse. It breathed easier. New hires came in waves, but this time their interviews focused not only on qualifications but on character. Tamara revised training protocols, embedding empathy and accessibility at their core. Luis stepped into his new title with quiet pride, his badge reading Customer Relations Supervisor catching the light as he walked the halls. He held regular, listening sessions with staff, advocating for employees who often felt invisible. The janitorial crew, the part-time weekenders, the elderly greet. Under his influence, the tone of Carter Plaza softened, becoming warmer, more human. Elaine, once only a name behind the brand, became a regular presence. She rolled through the mall in tailored blazers and calm command, chatting with vendors, waving to children, listening carefully to stories shared in passing. And slowly the greetings changed, not stiff or fearful, but genuine. People held doors. They asked questions. They looked her in the eye, not because of who she was on paper, but because of what she had revealed in them. On a golden afternoon, Elaine and Tamara sat on a bench near the west entrance, sipping coffee and watching a young girl twirl in front of a store window. "You really shook them," Tamara murmured, a small smile playing on her lips. Elaine didn't look away from the crowd as she replied, "No, they just finally looked up." Elaine sits in a sunlit room lined with soft bookshelves, her posture straight, her voice steady as the camera rolls. Dressed simply, a small pin of the Carter Plaza logo on her blazer, she begins. "The way you treat a stranger says more about your heart than any resume ever could." There is no pretense in her tone, only truth earned through hardship. "Don't look for power in a title," she continues, her eyes unwavering. "Look for it in the courage to care. That's what shapes a community." Her words settle like soft rain, quiet but impossible to ignore. The screen fades to scenes around the plaza. A young employee reaching out to help an elderly woman with her walker near the escalator. Another holding a door open for a family juggling strollers and shopping bags. People smile, nod, linger for a beat longer than necessary. The atmosphere hums with something gentler. Elaine's voice returns, now only in voiceover, fading into the hum of life. Kindness remembers. So will people. The screen darkens. Simple white text appears on black. To the unseen ones, this is your reminder. You are not invisible. A moment of stillness follows. No music, just the feeling, the truth. Then, a final shot. Elaine exiting the plaza in her chair, head high, sunlight glinting through the glass doors ahead of her, a soft breeze catching the edge of her scarf. The camera lingers just long enough to watch as a teenage employee runs a head knot, out of obligation. But instinct holds the door, open for her with a quiet smile. Elaine meets his gaze, nods once, and rolls forward into the light.